John, it is truly an honor to have you on the podcast. Seriously, I think since moving here, I have always personally, I think, dreamed of having you on the podcast and getting to interview. So we feel very, very privileged. And we're really excited to tell your story today.
Yeah, we've interviewed Derek in season 1, if you remember, and for any of you who have gone that far back into the archives, you might know about our excitement about all of the Rhubarb family restaurants. And so having you on, just to reiterate, is a very special moment. We're big fans, and I guess Sarah, John, we're going to put you on the spot and say, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what's the tweetable bio of John Fleer?
There's no tweetable bio. I've been around too long to abide by 140 characters or whatever. Yeah, failed graduate student. Rolled into being a culinary student. Got lucky to have my first job outside of the culinary school be at a place called Blackberry Farm. Wanted to come home to North Carolina and took a pit stop in Cashers during the '08 recession. But the ultimate goal was always to be not only back in North Carolina, but to be in Asheville. And we've been here since 2011, opened Rhubarb, and we can talk about the rest.
Cool.
Well, and not to, I am overzealous about it, but a little story about how you came on our radar, John, or my radar, which was, I think we first came to Asheville, one of our first times visiting. We looked up a place to eat, and we ate at Rhubarb. And it was fantastic. It was one of the best meals that we had. Mm-hmm. And we ended up talking to Derek. Your team, to Derek, to all of the staff, and they were fantastic.
There was a semi-boneless quail, Cornish hen?
Yeah.
So one of the two. Tiny
quail.
bird.
If I remember, it was quail.
Yeah, and I had never necessarily had quail, and I've never seen something semi-boned, and I was mesmerized. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Tony was. Yeah, exactly. He was fascinated by this. But then I remember I went home, and later I talked to my dad, and I told him, I said, "Hey, we're thinking about moving to Asheville, and we ate at this fantastic restaurant called Rhubarb." So my dad, being my dad, I think ended up looking it up and later told me, "Oh, I know the chef. I know John Fleer. Well, not personally, but I know of him. And apparently he used to go to Blackberry Farm all the time, or frequently. And ever since then, he has been saving me newspaper clippings of anywhere where John Fleer has been mentioned or any of the restaurants, and then proceeds to mail them to me.
We have physical PR and stories of Rhubarb and John Fleer. And so how about, because Blackberry Farm doesn't necessarily mean anything to me. If you can give us a little bit of what are the details of some of these places? Because I now know that they're very kind of important destination, either resort, hotel thingies. Help maybe those who don't know the pre-story, give us a little context about what makes those two places so special.
Okay, I'll do that, but I first have to go back to the semi-boneless quail.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
and direct you to an old Gary Larson Far Side cartoon. Okay. Which is a one pager that is a depiction of the boneless chicken ranch. Just go look that up for a laugh.
Okay,
fantastic.
An old Far Side cartoon that I will never ever forget. So.
We'll make a note. There will be links to it in the show notes page. Making it at Asheville.com. Love it. And then
to Blackberry.
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel I feel charmed in a lot of ways, but that was one of the most fortuitous, lucky things that happened to me ever. Also backed up by a lot of heartache and sweat and blood. But yeah, Blackberry was and is still probably the gem of hospitality in the South. It is a small resort hotel in the foothills of East Tennessee that actually borders the back end of the property, actually borders the Smoky Mountain National Park.
Wow.
So that gives you a sense of its sort of middle of nowhere / center of your own universe feel.
Got it. Is it known for like presidents going? Like I think I've heard of a place. No. So is it?
I mean, so it's changed a bit. It is owned by Chris and Sandy Bell. Sandy started Ruby Tuesdays, and Chris is the sort of heart and soul visionary of this feeling of hospitality that Blackberry creates. It started as a corporate when they bought it. Sorry, it's been around since the 30s, but when they bought it, they used it as a corporate retreat primarily. And so sort of because of that, the arc of its initial development as a property was much more right. I mean, in this day and age, you'd be more likely to find Jeff Bezos there than Obama.
Yeah.
It's a lot of well-heeled, well-off business folks who might not. I mean, Jeff Bezos might have been the wrong example because everybody knows who he is, but CEOs, yada yada yada. And it really it evolved from this corporate retreat, and in 1991, it finally opened to the public as a small 23-bedroom resort.
Oh, wow.
Country Inn. I arrived about 10 months after they opened. I had no freaking idea what I was doing. I was fresh out of culinary school, and none of us did. I was talking with my sort of partner in crime, who is still there, a gentleman named Brian Lee, who developed the hotel and guest services side of what Blackberry is today. And we both sort of laugh about how naive we were.
Wow.
But that's part of its success, is that, when you have some people who go into this business with a vision and have to figure out how to run it successfully without a whole lot of background and knowledge, you get, good or bad, you get a product that's unique.
Yeah. Well, so when you arrived there, first of all, what was your position as you went into Blackberry Farm?
So I was fresh out of culinary school. I had done a year in a program that they call the fellowship program. I was doing a fellowship at the CIA after I graduated, which essentially meant that I was the sous chef in one of their 4 public restaurants. So I worked with my person who has been my mentor ever since then, a chef named Jonathan Zierfoss, at one of the restaurants, which was called St. Andrew's Cafe. I also worked on the weekends as Mary Tyler Moore's personal chef.
Whoa.
Which seems to fascinate lots of people.
Yeah, I mean, what was that like?
It was cool. She was a dear, wonderful human. She and her husband lived, I guess, on Central Park during the week, and then every weekend they would come up. They had a horse farm in Millbrook, which, as y'all may know, it's 30 minutes from Hyde Park. It was about 40 minutes from Rhinebeck, where I was living while I was in culinary school.
Wow.
And
so I would work. It worked out such that this fellowship was, that particular restaurant operated Monday through Friday because it was the first one in the curriculum that where students were operating it. The other two, which were much fancier and more involved, ran like Tuesday through Saturday schedule. Anyway, all that to say, I worked Monday through Friday at St. Andrews, got up in the morning on Saturday, went shopping for whatever I had planned for Mary and Robert, and went shopping, drove out to their house in Millbrook, worked at us. I did not stay out there because I was close enough, but I would, cook Saturday lunch, Saturday dinner, and then whatever their schedule was on Sundays. And it worked out so that Mary was diabetic. And because St. Andrews, where I was working, was sort of nutritional cuisine focused, they sort of, whoever her PA was, went to someone who was at least somewhat familiar with health concerns.
Right. Yeah. So,
Wow.
I mean, what was there a particular meal or something that her and her husband loved to eat that you would make for them, or?
No. I mean, like any, and this is why, I mean, okay. How do I put this? I as much as I loved working for them as a personal chef, I would never be a personal chef again. That dynamic is not something that I'm looking for. And it wasn't a negative experience at all, but it definitely taught me that was something. And here I was early on in my culinary career, definitely taught me that was something that I could check off my list and never want to do again.
Which I find so interesting, because I feel like Tony and I have talked about this. I feel like I'm the opposite, where I would rather cook for a friend or like one small group than a restaurant full of people, which is clearly the opposite for you, it seems like. Yeah.
But also, I have to imagine there's more to it than just the like the quantity of food that you're preparing.
Sure.
And it's one thing to have two friends over for dinner. It's another to have two employers telling
with
you
particular
to
needs
cook six meals,
yeah.
Over the course of 2 days. So I can't imagine, and I look forward to hopefully unpacking some of the dynamics that differentiate, let's say, making food for family and friends and being a home cook, and then running multiple restaurants, right? So there's a huge range of, like, I like to make eggs. I do eggs and bacon. Okay. It's not bad. Sarah, everything else is probably wildly better. But I can make eggs a couple different ways. That is so different than managing multiple restaurants. And so the continuum from interest in food to deciding to go to culinary school to getting your first restaurant gigs, whether it's part of the curriculum or private chefing, to where we are today, which is 3 restaurants, all very close to the heart of downtown Asheville, is a seemingly long road. And so we're at, it lives in the brain. And so we're
So that was the gray hair that I was pointing.
that's the gray.
Not the brain.
Yes. So how, there's a couple thoughts that I have about landing at Blackberry 10 months after it opens with what I would consider the most prestigious piece of paper that you can have about food, at least in the United States. And I imagine it was true at the time as well. So you have this piece of paper, you have a little bit of experience, and you walk into a resort that has the aspirations of being the best in the country or best in the world. And what things are forced upon you in learning? What things happen by chance? What things happen on purpose? And how long are you there?
Well, I was there for almost 15 years. So I had left in 2007. Okay. I started there in 1992.
Wow.
And that's a long time to work in one place, especially in your first job after culinary school.
Yeah.
Remembering that, I mean, there's a lot of people that may graduate from any prestigious institution with a piece of paper in their hand, but they're not given the job of, whatever you want, vice president of operations coming out of, wherever, Harvard, Yale, Duke, whatever. That you don't walk out and say, here's my pass to run this company or this division of your company. So that's why I say that I really had no business being in that position. The sort of cool story of how it was linked was that the dining room manager at St. Andrews was also teaching a continuing education class in dining room management. The innkeepers, not the owners, but the innkeepers of Blackberry were up there at CIA taking his class. I had done almost a year of this fellowship when I was only supposed to do 6 months, but I was really enjoying the heck out of what I was doing. But I knew that my time was kind of the fuse was burning, and I was going to have to leave that position soon. And so Nyhoff said to Bernadette Doyle, who was the innkeeper at Blackberry, she said, "I've got this guy you really should meet. He really wants to return to the South. He's done a great job for us." So he set up a meeting. And she came in, Bernadette came in and observed the kitchen one night while essentially my job as the fellow or as the sous chef was to run the kitchen while the chef instructor served mostly as the instructor. So all the ordering, all the expediting, a good deal of the training, and we would rotate classes every 3 weeks. So it was like every week you've got a new kitchen team. Which was the best possible management training ever. So that's how that. So Bernadette and I hit it off. We sat down for an hour in the office of St. Andrews, and she kind of wooed me as to what those possibilities were at Blackberry, and I was just smitten. Even though I'd never, in my wildest dreams, thought that I would live in the hills of East Tennessee.
Yeah. Wow.
Well,
wow.
You asked me a multi-layered question.
Yeah, and you did a great job answering.
Yeah.
What a crazy, educational opportunity. That seems so perfect as like, oh, we get 3 weeks. I'm going to teach, develop, train, and then have to work with people who are starting over from square one. Like that's seemingly the hardest part of growing a team or a business is the onboarding and ramping up. And then once people get into a groove, it seems like that would be, maintaining is a different thing than getting up to speed, is my guess.
Yeah. Well, and I have a question that's kind of like way before in this timeline, which is, I know that you studied, is it philosophy?
Philosophy and religion.
Philosophy and religion in college. Uh-huh. And then you went to the CIA. So tell us about...
Central Intelligence Agency.
Not that CIA, the Culinary Institute of America. Sorry. How did you know that you wanted to go to culinary school? Was there a moment there that led you to that path?
When I was in college, I did a study abroad program in Venice, Italy. And that is where
we're familiar with Venice, Italy. Yeah. Venice, not California, I guess would be that.
That is where the fire was lit. And some of it was about food. Some of it was about the cooking of food. A major part of it was about the culture of food. that I experienced. So Wake Forest University, which is where my dad taught until he retired, owns a home on the Grand Canal in Venice, which every semester they sort of stock with 20 to 24 students, a professor in a little neighborhood that is sort of on the non-Piazza San Marco side where the Salute is, and very close to the Salute. So it was even then when I was there, Venice was a very touristy town, and this was forever ago. Yeah. But we were in a legitimate neighborhood, and that feeling of going out to the butcher, to the fruttivendolo, to the bakery, and all of that was just like mind blowing to me. It was just was so fun. And it was there that I realized that it was possible to sort of have an existence where you thought a lot about what you ate. You thought a lot about who you were going to eat with, and you spent that time eating, solving the problems of the world, by creating bonds of family, friendship, community, all of that. So I had been cooking some in college. When I came back, I kept cooking. I graduated from college, went into a graduate program after working as a year in a library, and needed a job in graduate school to sort of help my wife and I pay the bills. She was also a graduate student in psychology. And so I walked up the street to a place called Aurora, which is in Carborough, next to Chapel Hill. And this wonderful chef named Gwen Higgins saw something that allowed her to, hire this guy who had never worked in a professional kitchen to come roll pasta and be a pastry cook. So, how graduate schools are, where most of your seminars are in the afternoon. I was able to go in and work from 7 to 2 or 7 to 3 or whatever, and then go to a 4 p.m. seminar.
So by show of hands, who still loves making pasta? Are the two of you raising hands? Sarah's raising hands. Cool. I love eating pasta. How funny is that?
I know. So that it's so funny, John. I had no idea. I mean, we've talked before, but I really didn't know about your experience in Italy and your experience with making pasta. And for those who are listening to the podcast, if you're new here, I love making pasta. And Tony and I also studied abroad in Italy and fell in love, with the whole culture of food and community through that. So I understand exactly I understand exactly what you mean when you say you loved the experience of going to the butcher shop and the bakery and the milk shop and all of these little places and picking out your food. So heard and yes on all counts to our
part. One of the cool things that our professor did, which was just genius, and he is now a neighbor of my parents, so I get to continue to keep up with him. He is the definition of the nutty professor. But that said, he divided this group of 24 people into 5 cooking groups, and we were responsible for essentially feeding these small units of ourselves during the week. And that was the way it was during the semester. So we, as a little family, a little community, created a plan for every week. And, so we had to shop. We had to, no one was allowed to sort of go off on their own and, go to the other end of the island and find the McDonald's or, whatever was there at that time. And it also allowed us to, as we met other young people in the neighborhood who were community members, citizens, Italians, to come in and, teach us, participate in the cooking and share whatever, tiramisu or making pasta or, some family dish. So that was, it was brilliant.
That's so
and
cool.
Probably the reason that I do what I do.
Wow.
Yeah, I love that. Well, our experience was we were not forced to cook anything, but we definitely did and have a sense of community in our little apartment building and made dinners for each other and had Thanksgiving and all this stuff. So yeah, that's very interesting. We'll get back to the,
I should answer the question about how that goes to the CIA.
Yes.
So I got this job at Aurora, was cooking for a year there. A gentleman named John Robinson, who had also worked at the restaurant, left about 6 months into my tenure and went off to the CIA. First person I ever knew. I didn't even know a culinary school existed at that point.
Yeah.
He goes off, he comes back, halfway through, and he's like, oh, this is great. And I'm in graduate school, and I'm like, damn, I made the wrong decision. This sounds like so much more fun to be learning in culinary school. And I was sitting in a seminar at Professor Rule Tyson's house, sitting on his couch, talking about Ludwig Wittgenstein's concept of craftsmanship. And I said, I just stopped. This is the salient moment. I was sitting there on the couch and my head left the seminar and I was like, I don't know shit about craftsmanship. I can't be sitting here having this intellectual conversation in a graduate school seminar about craftsmanship when all I've ever done is sit on a couch and talk about this and that.
Wow.
So, and that's sort of the moment where I'm like, all right, in order for me to have this conversation here, I need to embrace a craft. And that's what I'm still doing. I haven't made it back to school yet, but I'm still trying to get myself ready to go back and have that conversation about craftsmanship.
That's so interesting. I think, I don't know if most people would respond in the way that you did to that moment, but like I've had in my own, small way, these moments where it's like you recognize the fraud in yourself or the dissonance where, you act in a certain way or say that you are like your ego is tied to this idea and you question how closely you're living with it. That moment for me showed up when, Sarah, we were just kind of talking about this adjacent, but Sarah loves making pasta, wanted to learn how to make pasta in a commercial kitchen, stages for several months in Brooklyn at a little like properly Italian restaurant that was 15 minutes walking from us. And so I go, well, who am I? And I'm like, well, if I'm going to do something, meat, I believe like I like meat. I like eating it. I can rationalize that, Homo sapiens are designed in some way to be, meat eaters is my assumption. But like, I also understand ethical arguments against it. So I was like, well, I don't have grounds to debate this one way or another because I'm so far removed from being the Homo sapien that was hungry enough to kill something that's alive and then cook it. And so I went hunting for the first time months later, and then I, apprenticed in a slaughtering facility because it was the only place that would have me. And I took 2-hour trains out of Brooklyn into New Jersey, and then to this place not far from where I grew up because I needed to know what I would do if I was in that situation. it hasn't changed my life in so much as like now I, years later, own a restaurant or own a butcher shop. But there was this moment of I need to know for myself. And I'm amazed that it's carried you as far as it has. I feel like we lost a tiny bit of the thread in your narrative because we're still only at CIA, and you did this incredible run at Blackberry Farm. So you clearly have this, to us at least, and what appears is like this drive. You have this curiosity. You have something that keeps you going. I'm wondering, once you get to school, once you get this at bat with Blackberry, it's almost unheard of for a millennial. Sarah and I are millennials. For a millennial to think of being in a single role for 5 years, forget about 15 years. What kept Blackberry, I'd say, interesting to you? What kept you there as long as you were there?
Well, maybe some of the answer to that is generational. I don't know. But I'll say this. There was also a time in the first 6 months when I was like, this is not for me. I hate this. I can't do this. And that was a daily conversation that I had, not that I wanted to not be a chef, but being there in that place was just, whether it was drive that was making it feel too overwhelming, like I really want to succeed, but I'm so far from it. And, some of it was personality thing. Some of it was being in an alien land. When I said I never thought I would live in the hills of East Tennessee, it's just like me saying I never thought that I would live on Mars. It was something that was a very different place for me. And so, I got to that point, and basically I said to myself, all right, John, you're going to put your head down for 5 years and you're going to figure this out. And that's essentially how I went through those 15 years, was the 5-year check-in. So that part I think is probably very generational. I don't know any millennial in my life that would say, but I do know that I don't know. Maybe it's unfair to say it's generational, but I do think there's something in that. So essentially, I would, like I said, we were all of us who were in that project, the first 25 people that were involved in that part of Blackberry Farm, were naive. And so staff would go home 11:30 on every night, and I would stay in my little office, which was, the size of a shoe closet, for another hour and a half, 2 hours every night, trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. And as that began to feel more comfortable, as I began to feel like I knew what was going on, then it became a lot more of the drive to, how do we make it better? First, the drive was, how do I figure out what the heck I'm doing? The second part was, how do we look toward this vision?
Yeah. Well, so I'm really curious, what were you doing in that office for an hour and a half, for 2 hours? Were you planning for the next day? Were you trying to figure out ordering things?
Yeah, all of those things, thinking about managing people, thinking about managing food costs, thinking about, writing menus that made sense. When I got there, it was very much a place, like it wanted to be this great small resort hotel, but the cuisine was great, but it didn't have really any real affiliation with the place. So that was sort of, and then again, back to the conversation about Venice. That was, what I did there was an experience of a place, a little neighborhood, the end of an island. And so Blackberry and East Tennessee became my little neighborhood at the end of the island. And so I had to find those local producers who made, country ham and bacon or buttermilk or grew vegetables. And the cool thing that happened very early on was that Chris Bell, the owner, one of the owners, said to me, I want you to write your vision of what you see Blackberry becoming, what you want it to be. Adam Sachs, when he did the profile of me in Garden and Gun just after Rhubarb opened, named that document the manifesto. And that, again, was a very valuable exercise that someone else posed for me, that I took it really seriously. And that was sort of the blueprint for the next, at that point, whatever it was, 14, 13 years when I actually wrote that.
Wow. So there are like two things that came up for me when you said that. One is, I think, it's important to highlight, and John, you probably can speak to this better than I can, but it seems like at that time, there, farm to table or local, serving local food like that at a restaurant was not really maybe fully trending yet. And I think it's interesting to note because in Italy, that's how it is, where you go to a region and they serve a very specific kind of food. They source their ingredients from the guy next door or the farm that's nearby. And it's very, very hyper local in that sense. So was that your experience? Like what was going on in the world then in terms of local food and farm to table?
So two things. First, there were some very influential chefs who were already working, who are my heroes and remain to this day my heroes, who were doing this. Frank Stitt in Birmingham, Louis Osteen, who is now deceased, and Bill Neal in Chapel Hill, who was at Crook's Corner. And then Ben Barker above all of those, mainly because from the restaurant perspective, he opened Magnolia Grill in Durham the year that I graduated from Duke. And he replaced my hippie granola grocery store called which was then a little unit called Wellspring Grocery. It's now a much bigger operation. But he took over that building, and I was pretty pissed. But he turned it into Magnolia Grill, and that was my first experience of going to a restaurant that really did something that looked fun, that was intentional, that was using local product. Not that I knew that was even a thing, but all the things that Ben and Karen were doing at Magnolia Grill just was sort of like that experience in Venice, where it's just like, okay, I get it. This is the way it's supposed to be. And that's why I resist. I think we've had this conversation before, but that's why I resist the phrase farm to table. And you said it yourself. This is how it's supposed to be. This is how it's done in a little town in Italy or a little region of Italy or whatever. That's just how it's done.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what that's how you're supposed to cook. That's sort of how I feel about that.
So there's this continuum that I've seen somewhere. I want to say it's in Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Chef, where he talks about like the continuum of dining experiences, and it transcends food, but it would be like a diner that has a massive menu and then a chef's tasting menu where no substitutions, no alterations, you sit down and food comes out. And how that continuum kind of speaks to the power dynamic from the diner to the creator of the food. And I'm just wondering how that all plays in your experience with food, with your restaurants and history in restaurants, and that idea of in Venice, they're probably not serving much cow-based meats as opposed to seafood because that's local, and you can go down and you can ask for a steak, but they're not going to have it. And so, your requests as a diner don't necessarily matter much. And where are you on that continuum? Not my best question, but that's what I'm thinking about is the dining continuum.
So I'll do my best to answer that, at least what I think I heard, and relate it back to the Blackberry history for one. And that is that one of the things after year 5, I looked up, all was cool. We were forging ahead. After year 10, all was cool, forging ahead. When I got to that year 15, it just, or getting close to that, it just felt like there's a certain romance of that sort of tasting menu, rarefied cooking atmosphere that is hard to break out of. But I got the feeling that I needed to do something different outside of that. And that was really the impetus behind what would ultimately become Rhubarb, which is, hey, you can cook really well and you can provide guest service at the level that it was done, and still to this day. I mean, Blackberry has the best guest service anywhere in the world. I will put that up, and that's I will put that up against anybody else's claim. But their sort of authentic ability to make people feel comfortable is not necessarily something that you have to pay $1,000 a night for. That can happen at a place like Rhubarb, or your any restaurant in town, any bodega or trattoria or whatever. That type of feeling can happen anywhere, and that was sort of what the mission was with Rhubarb. I will say that my favorite restaurant in Asheville, speaking just to give props to diners, is the Waffle House.
Every chef seems to love
on Tunnel Road
Waffle House.
Sausage and hash brown bowl. I mean,
Yeah, I love that. And I remember, John, you telling us about a Bitter Southerner podcast episode about Waffle House, I think. Was it the Bitter Southerner?
Yeah,
yes.
We listened to it.
We listened to it, and I grew up with Waffle House. I grew up in the South, and late nights eating pancakes and waffles and chocolate milk. But that really opened my eyes to sort of the culture that they've built there. And so, for anyone who's listening, if you're interested in learning more about Waffle House, definitely go listen to that.
Stop this podcast right now. Transfer over to the Bitter Southerner. Season 3 or whatever it was, but that really was, and it was informative to me as I'm very much an outsider. Suspect that I will feel this way for a while, but I'm learning and observing Southern customs in some way or another pretty much every day, and so this sort of anthropological review of Southern society via this welcoming community of the Waffle House was a very interesting lesson. And I see that mirrored in what we've experienced at Rhubarb and what you've always vocalized as the objective of the Ruplex and all of the properties that you own.
Well, and I'm wondering, if you had to identify, I don't know, that magic formula or that magic mix of what makes, for example, the hospitality at Blackberry Farm so great, or how you've incorporated that into Rhubarb. What is, for you, what is the formula? What is the combination of things that creates that kind of atmosphere for a guest?
That's a tough question. I think that authenticity is a big part of it. and both as the leader of that gang, allowing people to be themselves, as long as they're their best selves. And I'll go to cooking for just a second. I always said that I felt like the skill that I developed at Blackberry was something that I call a sympathetic palate, which is that, and this is what I talked to our staff there about, was we want to cook stuff that people want to eat, stuff that people think tastes really good. It's not what we think, what we want to eat, or which is the sort of no substitutions tasting menu, back to your point, Tony. But we want to cook what people want to eat. Now we can fancy it up. We can, there's this, we used to say there was this line between fancy and familiar that we tried to walk all the time, which is we're finding a really safe, warm, fuzzy space on the plate for the food, but we're also, which is the familiar, but we're also doing the fancy, and we're, sharing a new ingredient or a new technique or, a new flavor, but it's always couched in something that is in some way approachable. So that's the food part of it. But but that same sort of empathy is, I think, what makes great guest service. Is like, let me look at Tony and Sarah and figure out how they want to be treated. It's the flip side of the golden rule, I guess, but it's what's the vibe? How do they want to be treated? What did they come here for? How can I listen to the cues and see the cues as to what's going to make their experience here something that is not only, great, but is memorable, even in the, mildest way. Like, we had such a great time at Rhubarb. We should go back there. That feeling was great. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's applicable to many different businesses, really. It's the customers kind of always right, or listen to what your customers are saying and what they're asking for, because then you can meet them there.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about your transition from Blackberry Farm to eventually opening a restaurant and then 3 places in Asheville. Like, what was the moment when you realized it was time to leave Blackberry Farm, and then how did you know when it was time to create your own place?
Well, I mean, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, leaving Blackberry was many things. It was, finding yourself after another 5 years, lifting your head and realizing you weren't as comfortable, satisfied, happy, whatever it was, that you needed something, that I needed something different. Also wanting to be, there's so much tied up in that. There's a lot about my family as well. As time ticked along, so I've been pretty blatant about my focus when I was at Blackberry. As time ticked along, I realized that that where I was living wasn't where I wanted to live. And I have good friends in Maryville, Tennessee, relationships that I treasure. I got to be a soccer coach after I left, and will always value those few years when I wasn't, couple of years when I wasn't in a restaurant, but was doing something else as a break from being a chef. And but culturally, frankly, I don't miss it. And so what Katie and I were looking for was something that was, had a little bit more texture to it.
And so Asheville finds its way into your crosshairs. Right. And then was the move to Asheville to open a restaurant?
Yeah.
Was there
and there was a moment where I flirted with doing that in East Tennessee, Knoxville or Maryville or wherever. But that moment was quickly squashed by the recession. And going to, the neighborhood bank there and saying, hey, I'm looking at this property. Let's talk about financing. And they're like, oh, this was before anyone knew that there was a recession and that this housing bubble was about to burst. But the banks knew, and they're like, we're not considering anybody for any kind of business loan. So, forget about it.
Wow.
So, and at that point, it was like, okay, we had become quite enamored with Asheville over the time we lived in East Tennessee. It was only 2 hours away. We'd come over for concerts. My parents live in Winston-Salem. It was the precise midpoint to drop off kids with mom and dad if we're going, on a trip or something. And, I think Salsa was the only restaurant in downtown at that point, and we would come and park the car. And Salsa didn't have a dining room; they just had their walk-up counter and like 4 stools. And we loved salsas, and we would get our little clamshell and we'd go sit up in Pack Square. And now I'm there. I'm not now. They're my neighbor.
Yeah.
But so we had watched, because we kept stopping here on the, all the time, we had watched Asheville start to really grow and see the potential. So yes, it was. Then it was like, okay, how do I do this? How do I open a restaurant before I turn 50? And where do I want to do it? Asheville was the only real answer. And so we waited out the recession. We had our oldest son had just started high school. And so we let him finish out high school. We just made a commitment to stay for 4 more years. And my wife's practice was very successful and healthy, and that was okay. And then we moved in 2011.
Wow. And so meanwhile, all of this is happening. Are you coaching soccer? Are you working at another restaurant? He's like, yes. Okay.
Well, from 2007 to, actually I'd started right before I left Blackberry. So really from 2006 to 2011, I was coaching. I ran the little Maryville soccer club. But at the same time, in 2009, the folks who own Sunburst Trout, the Eason family, approached me about opening what was supposed to be just a 1-season restaurant out in Cashiers called Canyon Kitchen, because they had started to build this wonderful community in Cashiers on family land, and then the recession hit, so they had a dozen houses. They had this event barn or community center barn that they had built that was gorgeous, but they only had 12. I'm going to get those numbers wrong, but let's say they had 12 houses in this neighborhood that was designed for 245 or whatever. So they're like, hey, John, you're not doing anything. What would you think about coming over to Cashiers and doing this restaurant? You only have to do it Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll rent an apartment we'll rent a house for you in Cashiers. And it'll be Memorial Day to Labor Day. You can basically stay in East Tennessee and come over 3 days a week during the summer. So I did that.
Wow. And that still exists.
It does?
Am I right? Canyon Kitchen. I think I've seen it. on
It's the
advertisements.
most
We've not
beautiful
been to
place to
Cashers.
enjoy a meal certainly in Western North Carolina. I mean, there are very few places that are prettier than that little canyon to have a meal. So,
Kenny Kitchen.
So I did that in
Shout out,
2000, the summer after we opened Rhubarb, and then it became just too much. I needed a helicopter.
Yeah.
Heard. And so, I mean, I 2011, it's not exactly, you're not, as a nation, I don't think we're exactly out of a recession. What, like, is it a business plan that makes a restaurant happen? Are you squirreling away money and it's entirely self-funded? Like, how does one go from, running a successful restaurant to opening a restaurant? That seems, even in that step, that seems like a very big step. Running Blackberry and then running Canyon.
A lot of support from your spouse, who works just as hard as I do, who's very good at what she does, allowed us to, squirrel away essentially every penny that I earned at Canyon Kitchen in the 5 years that I was there, went into the Rhubarb Fund, and gave us some base for creating the restaurant. Honestly, again, it's one more of those sort of fortuitous moments of luck, good fortune, whatever. Banks don't loan money for people to start restaurants. I mean, they just generally don't. And I happened to meet the folks at what was then Asheville Savings Bank and now is First Bank, and they did.
Wow. And so is that because restaurants are just the percentage of the ones that make it is so low historically?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would loan someone money to start a restaurant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's high risk, and banks don't like high risk. But I think that's also a reflection of where Asheville was at that time and how well they understood I think there was sort of a community sense that could be something that would help Asheville come out of a recession. The downtown area had already begun to sort of be developed with restaurants and other cool stuff going on. And, I think there was a sense at Asheville Savings Bank that it could be a really good thing for the community.
What was in that Rhubarb location before y'all showed up? Because it seems like, when they say the three most important parts of business is like location, 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 that's about as ideal of a location as I can think of after being here for a year. Yeah,
no doubt. And I had basically been through every inch of available real estate in this town, in downtown and surrounding downtown from 2000. Well, before I was looking, while I was at Canyon Kitchen, I would come over maybe once a month to try to walk the streets and see what was available and see what was happening. So, I mean, this was a long time in the planning. But so the restaurant I was at a dead end. I got a call from a friend of mine who lives in town and said, I just heard that Bistro 1896 is going to close. This was the weekend after Valentine's Day of 2013. And I believe that Bistro had been there for 16 years. And so before that, the space in Rhubarb that is where the wood oven was a restaurant called La Caterina, which, as legend has it, was one of the best Italian restaurants for, hundreds of miles. So yeah, it was also, that space was also an adult bookstore in the 70s. And there was a cigar shop, Finkelstein's, which is still down the street. The pawn shop was in the middle storefront of Rhubarb from its origin until I don't know when.
Yeah. I guess that's also a good point. Did you take over storefronts and has Rhubarb expanded from where it started, or did you always have this footprint?
It's always been that footprint, because Bistro, when La Caterina left in 2002 or 2003, had taken over. They took over that space. They had taken over what was the lobby of the Adler building to be our bar space. The footprint has expanded, behind us, because we took the building that French Broad Chocolate Lounge was in, to become the Rue, and then our event space upstairs. So,
got it. So much history behind these places. Well, I want to get to the Rue and Benny on Eagle as well, but I'm curious to know, in those first few years of running Rhubarb, like what were the mistakes you made, or like what were those key learning moments where you were like, I got this now, like I'll never make that mistake again?
Wow. There's so many things. I wouldn't say that. There were some hiring mistakes. There were some people mistakes, and those are the biggest. But they're also, they make themselves pretty obvious pretty quickly. And so, when you're starting a new restaurant, you don't know how many people you're going to need. You don't know, there's so much you don't know. So that was that. I had to, as much time as I had focused on running a restaurant at both Kenyon Kitchen and at Blackberry, I had to educate myself on all things business still. That is, there's many parts of my life, but running a restaurant as a restaurant is one thing, with food and service, etc. And then running a business is a completely different kind of understanding what's happening week to week, and tracking it and analyzing it and seeing what you can do better from that side of things was something that I really didn't. I think I was better educated than many, but I still think that there were a lot of things that I had to improve on, for sure.
Can I ask what kind of thing, what stands out as maybe an IE in that space? Is it forecasting or tracking sales? What are examples of business lessons?
So all of that, but I think the thing that's the most embarrassing to me, and so I feel very comfortable in sharing it with y'all, is that I didn't balance my books for 3 months. I had money I had blanking on the term, but I had base funds to operate out of. Money was coming in from the credit card, nightly drop processor. Yeah. I was writing checks to vendors, etc. But I had no, and I had set up QuickBooks and all that, and I was working out of QuickBooks, but I had no sense of whether anything was coming. I knew it was coming, and I knew it was going, but beyond that. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
okay.
you need to get a handle on this, son."
Do you have something like a bookkeeper today that sits as an intermediary, or do you own that responsibility?
I owned it for. So again, one of those Blackberry moments. It's like, all right, you're going to figure this out, Fleer. And so that's how I spent my day. My day off was doing the bookkeeping and paying the bills. And then we hired a bookkeeper who has been a godsend just in taking care of us in that way. But then with the pandemic, that's something that we had to put on hold. So she is helping us. She's not back to doing the full load. So, that's what I was doing this morning before we started to talk.
Yeah. Well, I feel you on that. I feel like our first year in business, we sort of like fumbled we still are fumbling our way through understanding accounting and all that stuff. And I'm embarrassed because I went to school for accounting. And hated it. So I forgot. I think I like purposely like blocked out everything I learned about accounting. But yeah, that's one of the things. One of our most valuable investments has been hiring an accountant and a bookkeeper to help us with those things because they are such time-consuming things. And if you don't know how to move everything around, it can be confusing. So.
Yeah, and I just to echo that, I was always of the mind like it'll work itself out. Like revenue is this answer to all problems. Yeah. It'll work itself out once it works out. And
you're so excited. I think as a business owner, you're so excited about the thing that you love doing that it's like, oh, I'll just worry about that later. Those numbers, whatever. Definitely can relate to that.
My lesson would be that though, while yes, revenue is something of a solve, like the closer I've paid and we've paid attention to all of the details, the better the thing that we've been hoping and tracking for has gone. So whether it's, paying attention to all of the little parking meter slips that we have in town when we would come in and try and meet with people for coffee and knowing, okay, we spent exactly $13 on parking this month. Not much, didn't hurt us, but like, good to know. And like every good to know that we got to, I think our business took a slightly better step in the right direction. But the first 6 months were something of a mess. It was good to know that when we went to an accountant to try and, I'll say unwind some of it, he's like, hey, this is actually really good. You guys did a great job. I was like, I don't believe you, but thank you.
Thank you for the flattery. Yes.
Flattery is, that is my currency of choice.
Okay, so hiring people, you learned a little bit about that. It seems like you learned a little bit about just running a business in general and bookkeeping. So then at what point were you like, okay, I got this, and let's do it again with the Roo?
So how did you know? It was just so easy? Is that what happened?
It was not easy at all, and we were not ready. But when French Broad decided they were going to move up onto the square, there was a space that was immediately behind us that was completely accessible to the basement of Rhubarb, where our office is and where our storage is and all of that. And so it was like, well, maybe we could do something. We had also just at that point kind of we're on the way at least to hiring Kaylee Laird, our pastry chef. And I'm just like, well, if we had a little bakery, then, we could round out our pastry program. We could hire more staff to sort of run a full scale pastry and bread operation. By this time, Rhubarb had been open for a little over a year, and we were like, people all call us all the time to want to host events here, and we just don't have the space to do it. So we say no, like flat out no ever. I mean, we never did a large event. We never took an event. So that was an opportunity. It was a business opportunity, and the way that those two buildings are related, Rhubarb's first floor is the same as the third floor of the Roo, And so that became very accessible to our kitchen at Rhubarb, but we also, French Broad had done all of their baking up there in that space anyway, and it had been set up as offices instead of what it looks like now. Offices and storage is what they used it for. So, I mean, I guess we sort of just talked ourselves into it. Like, we can make it work. There are some opportunities here. And we definitely want to choose our neighbors if we have the option to do that. So we'll choose ourselves to be our neighbors. Because who knows what could happen the other way. So no, there wasn't a moment when we were like, oh, we need to do this, and therefore we need to find a space to do it in. It's just one of those things where the opportunity presented itself, and there were some ideas that had been bubbling that behind the scenes that weren't really formulated, that we then sort of had to formulate and figure out how to make it all run as the Ruplex.
Yeah.
Which is the best name of a place that there's ever been. I love that so much. It's hard to describe. So then how would you, for people who might not be as familiar with the Rue versus Rhubarb, how would you differentiate those two locations, the objectives, what they do? It sounds like bread and pastries, but is it more than that?
Bread, pastry, lunch, breakfast, very casual, cafe, very oriented toward sort of an Appalachian pantry that, where we can feature local not only food ingredients, but also, sort of food related, table related goods.
Yeah. Well, and for those that are listening, I have to say, we love all of the Fleer restaurants and eateries, but we frequent the Rue very often and are huge fans of the biscuit sandwiches that are there. If you haven't had one, you've got to try it. They're the best biscuit sandwiches I've ever had.
And if I'm the only person from New Jersey that you're loosely acquainted with, A, you're welcome, or I'm sorry. But B, New Jersey and New York has a very specific thing where breakfast sandwiches is like, I don't know. I think there's a flag in the sand around this is the thing that New Jersey loves. These Taylor ham, egg and cheese breakfast sandwiches.
On a roll or on a bagel or something.
On something. We came down and saw a breakfast sandwich on the menu on a biscuit. Had to try it, and then I kind of disowned all New Jersey breakfast sandwiches. I was like, "This is the new line, and by which all other sandwiches are judged by me." I remember that first bite vividly. Sarah, I think, remembers the Bene first biscuit bite.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue. So that's actually where we, I think, first had a biscuit from any of your places. I don't think we had yet gone to the Rue. We actually ate at Benny first when we were visiting town and had the Benny biscuit and instantly fell in love. And then I went on this 5-month-long journey of trying to discover the recipe. And we'll save that story for another day. But anyways, I became obsessed with them. And then later we made the connection that, Benny on Eagle is a part of the Rue and Rhubarb. And we were like, this makes so much sense because everything is fantastic. So, but tell us, there's the biscuit link. Exactly. But talk to us too a little bit about how Benny came along. Was that, something that you really wanted to do and sought out to do, or did that also come to you more as an opportunity that was presented?
Yeah, I mean, very much so option B, because after opening a second restaurant way earlier than I wanted to, or even, I don't even know that I ever wanted to have more than one restaurant, but somehow I blinked and I had two with Rhubarb and the Rue. So I was quite satisfied and happy. And the folks that were developing the Foundry Hotel called me and said, Jane Anderson at the Asheville Independent Restaurant Association has told us that we should talk to you about being our restaurant partner for this hotel that we're developing over on the block. And my gut was like, hell no. Those weren't the words that came out of my mouth. But it was like, I can't, no. And, I think all of us who are even moderately successful in this business get calls on a regular basis from someone who wants you to take your restaurant brand and open in Charlotte or in South Asheville, or, why don't you come, because I grew up in Winston-Salem, I probably had half a dozen times in the last 5 years when someone from Winston-Salem has emailed or called and said, hey, you're from Winston, why don't you come open a restaurant here? It's like, that's just not how I'm built. Others may well be, and bless their hearts. But so I agreed to chat with them about this opportunity. I walked through the space, which at that point was completely, they were only part of the way through the demolition. It was a big giant mess, but it was post 2016 election, and there was something inside me that said, this is a neighborhood in decline. It had, even in the few years that I had already lived here, I had seen sort of businesses close on the block and the street get quieter and quieter. And, I'd begun to learn a little bit about the history of the Black community in Asheville and of race and race relations in Asheville. And I'm like, if I don't at least pitch the idea of doing a restaurant that is devoted to celebrating that neighborhood and celebrating the West African and African American influence on the food that I've been cooking for, at this point, 20 years. If I don't at least pitch that, then someone's going to come in and put a
Wendy's,
Red Lobster, knockoff in this space, and that's going to stink. So I did. I pitched that, and we go back and forth. David Tart, who's the primary owner developer of the Foundry, says it was like 2 months before I called him back to respond to his query, and then I tell him that after I pitched that idea of what I thought that restaurant should be, that it was about a month before he got back in touch with me. So I don't think either of those figures are necessarily correct, but it just kind of goes to show you how it wasn't an automatic thing, and it was, I think well thought through on their part. And, there was only one way that I was going to do that particular restaurant project, because I wasn't interested in doing anything else anyway. So, it's one of those things where an opportunity was presented and I kind of had to work my way through it.
Wow. That stands out to me. I don't know that there's many times, well, maybe I'm just making something up, but I'm impressed by one that shows up for me is like your patience, it seems, throughout all of this, and then your ability to also seize spontaneous opportunity. And I'll highlight a couple moments. The 5-year increments with which you were thinking when you were back at Blackberry seems less common for most people to be able to pull off or even to conceive of. I know that my mind doesn't necessarily think in 5-year increments, I think at 5 days or 5 hours, right? Like that's, I'm much more proximate than that. And then knowing that maybe you wanted to open a restaurant, but the willingness to spend several more years in East Tennessee before moving to Asheville versus being like, I'd say eager and taking whatever was available in Asheville during the 2009 decline, if it was possible to do it. Some people might have done it. And how fortuitous all of that seems to have been, because you have now this incredible location, and when the back side opened up, you seized the opportunity before you had necessarily built it into your 5-year plan. I just think that those two personality types seem to be in conflict, but it's amazing that they both exist in you. That's my positive feedback and not a question. I think it's incredible. That's like, I don't know if I'm either of those two people, but I see it in you and I'm amazed by it.
Well, and that's, I guess, that goes back to, I think, what I said at the beginning, which was that I feel very fortunate and very lucky, and there have been a lot of things that have happened that I didn't earn or deserve, by normal metric of work hard and get results. It's not that I don't work hard, but in terms of driving toward certain results. I'm also reminded when you say patience, because I have been accused of that quite often. There is one of my favorite authors, and who was also a English professor of mine at Duke, is a gentleman named Reynolds Price. And there's a line in one of his books where he describes someone as being as patient as the floor. And sometimes I imagine that I'm that character.
getting walked over. Is
the floor.
Floors stand for a lot.
It might be a different discussion, but I can argue for various other things that the floor does for the world.
This is true. I can think of that as well. Well, I think that I just want to highlight that for a second, because I think that there is this, what I sense is that there's this combination of perseverance and moving towards the goal that you want, and then also just being open to those opportunities. Because I think that sometimes people, and when I'm saying people, I'm probably talking to myself, but they're so focused on what they're doing that they don't see what's around them or welcome other opportunities, and so they miss those things. And so what I see in you, what I congratulate you on is that perseverance, but also that, openness to new opportunities that you might not have planned or expected to have come in your 10-year plan or whatever it might be.
And perhaps the opportunity that no one saw coming is in the 2020 early days of 2020, when a pandemic hits the globe. And so I want to transition quickly to like present tense, what's happening in your world. And then we also need to, ask you a little bit about Asheville. So as we transition towards the end-ish of this conversation, how has whatever version of your personality that has sat, let's say, at the forefront, evolved in a even new, like, because restaurants can be scary, or are seemingly on the outside in scary in their own way. How has being a restaurateur of multiple locations during a pandemic, how's that good, bad, ugly, or an opportunity? How are you thinking about it today?
Well, there is and this may speak to what Sarah was just saying, but there's a phrase that I have had posted at my desk since the early days of Blackberry. And I'd talked to you then about, that things were not always bright and shiny, that there were some bad times. But this has always been sort of at my very core, And it's an old Taoist saying that says, "Barns burnt down, I can see the moon." So I can sum up my approach to the pandemic that way. I can, it is, and that might be the place to leave it, because everything else seems like business speak. There are opportunities, in defeat, there are opportunities, and, in struggle, there's, all of those things, but it's simply a perspective of saying, all right, this has happened, something I cannot control. What can I control? What can I see? It's not that bad, because the moon is up there, and I'm okay. It certainly oversimplifies the situation, but that is the North Star for me in terms of how I walk through a situation like this.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to say anything more than that. It's just like that's there's been crappy stuff that happened. Yeah. Yes. It's a struggle. Yes. Restaurants have it harder than a lot of other businesses, but I also find myself thinking about, on the way to my car every day, I look at the movie theater, and they're still closed. I've got I've got a full patio. I've got a healthy staff. I've got we sort of modulated to we've had to make several adjustments, but I think everybody's embraced now that we're only doing patio dining at Rhubarb. When we launched into that, I was like, all right, we've got this great opportunity to have our little kind of Parisian cafe out on the sidewalk, and it makes me pretty happy to look out those windows every day and see people enjoying themselves and having good food and drink and conversation. And it's not the same as a bustling restaurant like the before times of Rhubarb, but it's something that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we transition to sort of our last little bonus, what we call the bonus round section, what's on the horizon for you? I mean, is there, apart from, of course, getting through the pandemic and making everything work that way, is there anything that you're hoping to do in the next few years? Any new projects?
Oh shoot! You said projects.
Or just milestones with
I don't
the current
know.
project.
Like, do you want to write a cookbook? Do you want to open another place, or whatever you can share with that?
I don't want to open another place. I want to continue in terms of our businesses. I want to continue to develop my team and key people in my team to really, potentially become part owners of any of those outfits. And I think that there's real possibility there. There are great folks that work with me, and I'm very fortunate. I enjoy writing. I've always found it incredibly difficult. So I'm sorry, those two can't be the same. I like writing. I think I can do it pretty well. I find it really difficult. So I wonder if at another stage that I'm in my life that I might write something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it will be a cookbook.
It'll be Zen in the art of running a kitchen.
And maybe that's exactly
the memoir of a chef finding himself through craftsmanship.
Well, and maybe that's exactly it. I've been intrigued recently. Was listening to David Chang and Lisa Donovan speak about. Lisa is someone I've known for a long time. She has a new book out called The Lady of Perpetual Hunger, I think is the name of the. She's a pastry chef in Nashville. I've honestly, it's funny you asked me that question, but listening to her talk about writing this book has made me more than ever before think about the possibility of doing something like that. But most of all, what I want, like what's on the horizon before all of my 3 adult boys get too far away from where we are now. I have told all of them, including my wife, that my next life monument is to walk the Camino del Santiago in Spain. So my hope is that sometime in the next 2 or 3 summers, when they are done with college classes and before they're playing semi-pro soccer in the summer, and when my oldest one is transitioning between jobs, that we all just need to plan this to happen at the same time so we can take a month or 2, or I don't even know, how we would do it, when we would do it, but that's something that I
heard.
Yeah.
When you say horizon, that's where my mind goes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Amazing. I hope you can make time for that, because that does sound pretty amazing. Well, I feel like there are so many more questions that I want to ask you, but we are coming to the end of our time. So we will have to do a part 2, I think, eventually. But we're moving into what we call the bonus round, or the speed round, but it's not really a speed round. It's just a few more lighter questions than what we've been talking about before. Tone, would you like to kick our speed round off?
I would love to. Just after this commercial break. So yeah, I think an important question that everyone is wondering is, in terms of football,
Soccer,
Serie A, no Champions League. What is your preferred soccer football league?
La Liga and the Premier League, depending. It's not depending. I love them both, but
Do you have a
Arsenal
club
is my
that you
club in the
bleed
Premier
for?
League. Barcelona is my club in La Liga, and I think the German league was so smart to go back during the pandemic and start earlier than everybody else, because now, even though I paid attention to it, the fact that was all I could watch for 6 weeks, after being starved of football for months, I now sort of find myself as a fan of what's happening in Germany as well. So, but honestly, I'll watch anything.
How much? Yeah. I would have imagined that your time in Italy might have put Italy on the map for you, but they're at least 4th seed in your overall leagues.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Cool, fair.
Well, I'm going back to food for a second.
The next podcast is all about Tony and John talking football.
Yeah, exactly.
I could ask questions. Don't ask me any.
Exactly. I want to know, what is your go-to comforting dish? Like when you're having a bad night or a bad day or whatever, what is that one dish that you just makes you feel better?
Right now, tomato sandwich. 100%.
Yeah.
I think you're the second person to talk about a tomato sandwich on the podcast so far. How is your tomato sandwich executed? I believe white bread is mandatory, but it might not be the case.
Here's something that I have not shared with you before, and that is that I have, but this is how I introduced myself to my staff the very earliest days of Rhubarb, is that I have an irrational fear of white bread. So,
tell us more.
Get it out of
here. I mean, maybe it was.
You can't. How can you trust it? What is that? What makes white bread?
Like sliced, yep. Pre-sliced. What's that? Sally. What was the name of Sara Lee?
Marita bread,
that kind of bread,
bunny bread, all that. I don't know. It may be buried deep in my childhood, but I really don't know. Hence the irrationality of it. So no, it is non-traditional in that it gets made on lightly toasted.
Good
lightly
bread.
Toasted whole wheat grocery store bread. It does have to be square and toastable and not very substantial, because it should by the end of it be something that you kind of hold in the palm of your hand and stuff the last bite in your mouth, because it's all falling apart. But it's just tomatoes, gray sea salt, cracked pepper, and Duke's mayonnaise, and that is it.
Got it. No raw onion, very important to note. And then with food media, my mind goes to movies, but you might not be a movie consumer. I don't know yet. Has there been a movie that has really captured the essence of being in a restaurant or being a cook, chef, lover of food?
Wow. I am a movie consumer. All my kids' boys have there's a running list of films that they have to watch before they go off to college. So when I was in college, I managed a movie theater. So that was my part-time job. Oh, wow. I managed the art cinema in Durham, which is now called, it was then called the Carolina Theater, and is still that. But but food movies, I don't know.
None hit for
favorite. Maybe my favorite is Like Water for Chocolate, but I don't know whether that's movie like foodiness or just the sort of romance of it. I don't know. It's not my favorite movie. It's not. I mean, it's a long way from it. But when I think about food movies, Babette's Feast, those sorts of the ceremony of which is completely antithetical to my way of running restaurants, but that piece of it.
Well, our last question I'll ask you. Second to last question I'll ask you. Sorry, which is, if we had a magic wand, or someone in our audience had a magic wand, what one thing would you ask for right now? And it can be anything. Like, it could be a tomato sandwich if that's what you wanted.
Wow. A radical change. This is a powerful magic wand, right?
Yes.
Super powerful. Yes. A radical change in the way that we run our country and our communities.
Heard. And now for the final. Where in the World Wide Web would people go to find you, your restaurants, hear more about what you're up to?
I'm not a huge social media person, but would.
Yeah, you're on Instagram. John posts every week the produce bundles.
So that's what am I? John Fleer 123 on Instagram. Jay Fleer on Twitter.
Yes.
The Rhubarb AVL on Instagram for the two restaurants. Bene on Eagle. Instagram for Bene. I think that's
We'll link
Yeah.
out to
Yeah,
all the
and
restaurants
we'll have
and
all the
everything
websites.
as well. But I would also say, if you want to talk to John, just go to Rhubarb or Benny and ask for him, because he's probably there.
That's what I was going to say. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It truly is an honor, and we will have to do this again, maybe a year from now when the world looks a little bit different. Because again, I have a lot more questions that I'd love to ask you. But
Absolutely.
thank
I
you
look forward
again.
to part 2. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, John. Cool. So we're in what I'd consider, we'll clap, but we're in a bonus round. Anything we missed? Anything you want to add? I know that we want to respect your time as we're rapidly approaching.
No, but we should do this again. We should do. I mean,
I'd love to.
I know y'all. I don't know. Did you listen to the podcast that I did?
We haven't yet.
As a rule,
but
we try to avoid
Yeah,
it until after.
I mean, both of them, I have come up. Both that one, which was shorter than this, and then even today, come up and at the end of it, and felt like there's that we're barely kind of tickled the like that's just, maybe it's because I'm more reflective now, listening to these guys, Lisa, talk about her book and all the experiences, and so maybe
there's so, I mean, you have such a long story,
Yeah.
and they're in these 3 places, and I know we really wanted to tell that story to make sure we, unfolded that, but there's so much more
I'm sure we
that
can
I'm
have
sure
fun at
you
some
have
point.
to talk about. Yeah.
And it's also, I think, that just the nature of these podcasts, and that's why we go with the longer form, because like at the cost of some listeners maybe saying, I don't have 2 hours, the truth doesn't come out, or the meat doesn't come out in the appetizers. It just can't. Like, with the way these work out, the most meaningful moments are typically 90 minutes in or 84 minutes in, after all of the other stuff has been worked out.
Yeah. One more thing before you go, I'm going to take a quick picture of you on the screen for our Instagram. Can you just give everyone a little wave?
Hey, Instagram.
Yeah.
Hey, Instagram from John.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, John.